One of the great difficulties that exists in the realm of halacha is the lack of recognition of the distinction between a legal definition and reality. There's a prohibition in Jewish law of eating pork, right? Yeah, there's a prohibition of eating pork. So that's understood to be a prohibition of eating a piece of meat that came from a pig, right? A reality statement, right? You know, this is a piece of paper here. This is, you know, other things and so forth. And there's a definition here. What people don't recognize is in any legal system, this really applies across the board in any legal system, but it for sure exists in halacha, is that the prohibition in halacha is the prohibition of a halachically defined entity called pork, not a physical piece of meat from a pig. A halachic definition of what is halachically defined as pork or not kosher meat or whatever. That yields a very different conclusion. It doesn't mean in a lot of times when you're trying to work out the law and work out the situation, it doesn't mean you're trying to find the reality. It means you're trying to find the halachic reality. Okay? There are situations in halacha where a person will say, well, clearly it seems to be that this is a piece of pork. And the fact is, the halacha defines it not as a piece of pork. It defines it halachically permitted. The most classical case of that is bittul barov. Okay? And I use this as an example of what we mean by halachic reality. Now this applies in numerous amounts of cases. Okay? Situation is like this. You have 3 pieces of meat. Two are kosher, 1 is not. They get all mixed up.
They look like meat. They all look the same.
They all look the same. They look, okay. What do you do? Right? What do you do? So the point is that, you know, one of these pieces of meat is not kosher, and you know 2 are, or one, you know, in terms of reality. But what's the halachic reality of that definition? So while there are different opinions, the most general opinion is we have a concept called bittul barov. Bittul barov means that something is negated in the presence of a majority. So that if you have 3 pieces of meat, 2 kosher and 1 not kosher, the concept of the majority declares the 3 pieces of meat halachically kosher. Okay? And that is generally assumed to be law. That by most positions, that on Monday you can eat the piece of meat today, on Tuesday you can eat the piece of meat, the 2nd piece of meat, and on Wednesday you can eat the 3rd piece of meat. When you've eaten all 3 pieces of meat, you know one thing. What has happened?
You ate pork.
You ate, well, non-kosher piece of meat. Pork's a little bit problem because it has to look like the other one. So the point of it, okay? But you know you ate the kosher piece. So there are certain shittas that hold that one person shouldn't eat all 3 pieces of meat. However, the more accepted halacha, if I remember correctly, is that as long as you don't eat them all at the same time, Monday you can have 1 piece, you know, 2 hours later you can have another piece, okay? Because every time you take that piece of meat, it's halachically defined as kosher because of bittul barov. I'll give you another example like this. Okay? this is a little bit more a difficult example. It concerns a case of a woman who had an affair. Okay? The case is, the law with a woman who's had an affair is she is prohibited on the person she had an affair with and prohibited on her husband. In other words, going forward, she cannot have a relationship with her lover. For some reason she gets a divorce from her husband, she cannot marry her lover. She's also on the boil. And she's also on the ball. She can no longer live with her husband. Okay? A woman who's had an affair no longer live with her husband. Okay. Now, this woman comes forward and says she had an affair. Okay? Okay, so what happens? If a woman comes forward and says she has an affair, what happens?
We said she can't be with her husband, and she can't be with the person she had the affair with.
Right, so she can no longer live with her husband, right, it would seem. Okay. Only one little problem. What? Her testimony that she had an affair, what's the standing of that testimony?
Well, you need to have...
Right? The fact is that her testimony doesn't have standing. Right? Okay? She can't declare herself in the court. She comes forward and said, I had an affair. Doesn't have any standing in the court. So the Beis Din has no testimony to go on. So the point is, she comes forward and says, I had an affair. Her husband says, they've worked it out and says, listen, I still want to stay married to her. So we could say, so that, how do you create the prohibition? Because her testimony doesn't have standing to create the prohibition, doesn't it? Is that true?
You can have the prohibition, but you may not be able to execute the judgment.
So the point is that but the fact is, the husband says, I want to stay married. But the woman is saying, I had an affair. But her what's the standing of her testimony? So the truth is for a variety of reasons, they can stay married. Okay? So I was told that this question came before Moshe, and there was a woman who had an affair and then did tshuva and so forth and so forth, and her husband wanted to stay married and so forth and so forth, and came before Moshe, and Moshe basically said she can't make herself usher. Okay? That's basically it. So she has to, so that they can stay married.
But can the person who she had an affair with?
No, the person is not around. He's irrelevant, right?
But if he wants to ever blackmail her,
so then go back, try blackmailing her. Okay? I mean, the fact is that's another thing. I mean, he's not in the equation anymore because she shouldn't be talking to him anyways, right? The point is that she can't make herself usher.
Right.
So I was told that the further question was asked about the woman based on what you just said. She says, listen, you come up with all these technical arguments and so forth, very, very nice legal arguments and so forth and so forth. But listen, I know what I did, right? I was there, I know what I did, right? And if it's wrong for me to stay married, to have relations with my husband, I don't want to stay in the marriage. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Right? Because I know what was there. I know that I had an affair, and that really should make me prohibited on my husband. And the answer was given to her was no. You can stay married. Why? Because the prohibition is defined legally. It's a legal definition.
I think it's still prohibited. It's that, sorry, there's two prohibitions. One, a prohibition not to have an affair, and one, a prohibition to be with your husband if you had an affair. Right? You still have the prohibition of not being allowed to be with someone outside of a marriage.
Oh yeah, that she committed adultery and has to deal with her prohibition of committing adultery. That's between her and the Kodesh Baruch Hu, clearly. The point is that's exactly it. The creation of a further prohibition that she can't be with her husband. Okay, you're talking about the creation of the prohibition. Okay, and the creation of the prohibition is a legal determination. There's her prohibition of having an affair. That's a legal definition. She's an HSC. She cannot sleep with someone. That's fine. Here, it's a question of the prohibition. Is the prohibition created by just a simple reality she had an affair, or is the prohibition created by the legal determination that creates the prohibition? And the argument is that it's a legal definition. That prohibition wasn't created because the prohibition has to be created through legal terms. And that makes a big difference. And that's a lot of the problems that exist in a lot of questions that people ask. You know, about kosher, not kosher, about this and that. What they're saying is they're basically working on realities, on technical reality, or like this comes up all the time with the definition. For example, a lot of times the definition of when a woman is in nida, right? They think that the definition of whether you're in nida or not is defined medically. Go to the doctor and find out if a woman is having her period or not. That defines what she is. No! There are situations where medically the definition may be clearly that she is having her period. However, there has not been any halachic determination that defines her as a nida. And there are other situations, just the opposite, where the woman may not medically be in her period or whatever, or having, but halachically it's defined that way. Because the fact is, halacha has its own definitions. Now, this is something that happens a lot of times in terms of assumptions. So many times people come up with assumptions about Jewish law, and that's why when people ask the question, what about a vegan restaurant? You know something? They can serve all the vegetables in the world. Okay? They can serve all the clean vegetables in the world. Okay? That doesn't mean that necessarily it's kosher.
So what are we supposed to do then as halacha abiding Jews?
So that's why you have hashgachas. That's why they have hashgachas, because the hashgacha is informing you of legal definitions. What has happened, though, is that people aren't even aware of their legal determinations. What happened in the early 1900s when they have all these hashgachas? When people went into stores, they didn't buy anything? They knew they had to ask their rabbi, and they knew that there was this issue and that issue, and they'd sit there and say, somehow this rabbi came up and said this was kosher. I don't understand how he came to that conclusion, but okay. Or this rabbi said not kosher. Okay. But the fact is that they asked, and what happened is the populace was a little bit more knowledgeable of legal principles. So they understood the legal principles underlining the law.
So in places like Europe, where there's not as much of a well-known hashgacha, or maybe even hashgacha to begin with, and people more, I don't know if lax is the right term.
No, people may not be more lax because they don't know more. I don't know, but the fact is, what happens a lot of times is that sometimes necessity forces people to understand the legal principles.
Like I was in Finland, and they said, like I was with the Chabad rabbi of Finland, and we were going through the supermarket. It's like, oh, that's locks, it's locks, or this is this and that.
Yeah, so he knew the principles.
Right.
So the person starts working with those principles and so forth. And they're more aware of the principles. Okay, and therefore they're more aware of the legal possibility of making the legal definition.
Right, because you didn't always have hashkachas like in
Right.
the 1900s, 1800s.
Right,
Poland.
right.
There was no COR.
Right. But now that people have this and so forth, what you're really doing is saying, listen, you've checked this out and so forth and so forth. And usually what happens is that a lot of Jewish halachic decision making is decision making under uncertainty. Because you didn't have all the information. So a lot of halacha is decision making under uncertainty. So the point is that it's fine. Now that now what happens with hashkachas is they have more certainty of the situation. Therefore, they're more definite about their answers.
Right.
But what happens for a lot of people is they don't really understand the legal principles, and they start coming up with a total overriding of the physical reality with the legal reality, and what's lost is the understanding of the legal definitions.
So what are we supposed to do when we're confronted with that? When we're confronted not necessarily with deciding should I be able to eat this thing, but I'm with someone and he's like, why don't you eat this? What's possibly in it?
The answer is because the truth is the determination that it's kosher. There was a lot of people sit there and saying, well, no, kosher is a legal determination. The fact is I don't know enough about the legal laws. It's not that enables me to say that this is kosher pursuant to legal terminology. Okay?
You should learn the halachas. You can learn the halachas of kashrus, and you can have more knowledge.
In terms of details, in terms of the factual theory. I mean, there are and it happens all the time where people are confronted by certain situations that, what, the rabbi told you this was this, Rabbi? And yeah, because they know they understand the legal principles.
Does the kashrus have to do with absorption?
That's part of it, but it's defined by the legal definition of absorption.
Right. So,
there's a famous story.
There's nothing to absorb.
The fact of the matter is that when you say nothing to absorb, is it a legal definition of what needs to be absorbed? There's a famous story that there's a whole halachic discussion about the pancreas and the liver and stuff like that and so forth and so forth. So there's a lot of halachic issues and so forth and so forth. So back in Europe, someone walked into the Beis Medrash and asked the Rosh Hashiva with an organ, walked up to the Rosh Hashiva and said, here's this, I think the pancreas or whatever, and is it kosher? Okay, is it kosher? Is the animal that came from kosher or whatever it is? And this I think and this Rosh Hashiva looked and said, so this is the Halachic korkavan. I think the korkavan is the pancreas. So he looked at this. So this is the Halachic korkavan. This is the exalted korkavan. This is because when you go through the halachas, you're always reading about this and so forth and so forth. He says, and then he gave it back to the woman and said, truth is, I really don't know. It's the first one I've ever seen. The fact is that he knew all the legal theory, but he never saw korkavan. He never saw pancreas, right? So the point is in actually making the decision in terms of the real thing. He said, go ask someone who's dealt with it. But the fact is, he knew all the theory. So much of legal theory is in terms of legal theory. I remember Rosh Hashiva Minor, we learned the Gemara Eruvin. He had a great line. I remember once in Shir, he says, what we learned through the Gemara Eruvin? That in Judaism, not only is God invisible, but his walls are also invisible. Right? The fact is that people don't recognize the necessity of understanding that what you're called upon is first of all the dilemma of the situation, but you're called upon to make a legal determination of the situation. Like in terms, let's say in terms of motherhood. Okay, what defines motherhood? Give me some alternatives. When say someone is someone's mother, what are you saying? What defines motherhood?
They raise a child.
They raise a child. So you're saying motherhood is tied to the raising of the child.
Right.
Not necessarily being physically...
Right, motherhood is different from being a mother.
Okay, so what I'm asking is being a mother. What defines being a mother? So some people will say...
You raise a kid.
That's one question, raising a kid, right? Okay. In our modern technology, we have other questions. Okay?
Like what if it's a surrogate?
Yes. So one of the questions is motherhood defined by the genetic material, i.e., who supplied the egg?
Of course.
Okay. And there's other possibilities. Is motherhood defined by
Adoption?
Well, adoption leads into raising. That's a technical definition, a legal definition. By the way, adoption is an interesting definition.
To something halachically.
By the way, and there is no halachic definition of adoption.
What?
There's no halachic adoption. Halacha does not accept a definition of motherhood based upon adoption. It's not defined legally. See, that's a good example.
So then what halachas wouldn't apply to a biological mother as to an adopted mother?
But there is kibbut aim.
Kibbut aim does not apply to adopted mother.
Really?
That's what he's saying.
Is there a concept of being mechubed, the person who raised you? Yes. Okay. Is there an idea that someone who raised you, for example, you can sit shiva for your mother, for your adopted mother? Yes, you can sit shiva. In fact, a lot of people tell you you should sit shiva and do the things. Halachically, okay, there's no doubt that you like. Let me give you an example of a legal definition. Okay, in terms of gerus. Okay, if someone converts, right, that the legal bond of parenthood to child is severed through the conversion. Now, does that mean you have no respect to your parent who is not Jewish? No. And a lot of people say you're still supposed to treat that person with respect. Okay? The fact is, it's a legal definition. Now, one of the cases that exists in terms of legal definition is in terms of, is it the person who supplies the egg? Is it the person who gives birth? Okay? And there's a classic example that motherhood may be defined as a famous medrash, and all of a sudden this medrash, which is, and there's always a question with learning halacha from midrashim, but there's always an interesting medrash where all of a sudden this medrash became a real serious consideration in a lot of definitions. If you remember, Leah and Rachel got pregnant at the exact same time, right? Leah already had 6 boys, right? And Rachel had was carrying a child. Okay? She was pregnant and Leah was pregnant. There were already 10 sons of Yaakov born, which means there were already 10 Shvatim. In Ruach HaKodesh, everyone knew there were going to be 12. So if Leah's pregnancy was a boy, then she would mean she'd have 7 Shvatim, and Rachel would only have 1. Which means that Rachel would have less of the amount of Shvatim as Bilhah and Zilpah, as the other Imahot. So the question emerged that when Leah and Rachel were pregnant, Leah prayed that concerning her child. Now, the fact is, though, it seems to be that Leah was actually carrying a male and Rachel was carrying a female. So that means that Rachel would have ended up with only 1 Shevet. So Leah prayed for a switch to happen between the 2 fetuses. And therefore Yosef, left Leah's womb and went into Rachel's womb, and Dinah left Rachel's womb and went into Leah's womb. In other words, genetically, according to this medrash, Yosef was really the son of Leah, and genetically Dinah was really the daughter of Rachel.
Wow.
But it got flipped. Okay? So in the end, Rachel gave birth to Yosef, and therefore she's considered to be the mother of Yosef. and Leah gave birth to Dinah, and Leah was considered to be the mother of Dinah. It's based upon not the genetic material, it's based upon who gave birth. Okay? So some people point this out today in all these issues of surrogate mothers, that maybe the definition of motherhood is not defined by genetic material, it's defined by who gave birth. Now let me take this one step further.
You can go further and say it applies to adopted mothers, because there's no genetic link between a surrogate mother, as with Leah and Rachel, as there is.
But there is a link of motherhood. It's defined by who gave birth. There's still that physical connection. But it's not applied to adopted mothers, because giving the birth is what defines your motherhood. You're defined as a mother because you gave birth to that child. Okay. Now, this takes another connotation beside the laws of parenthood. Who the mother is also applies to another law within the Jewish legal system. Who else is defined by motherhood? You are Jewish if you're born to a Jewish mother.
Oh.
So the fact is what happens if a woman, egg, is
a Jewish mother
put into
or the opposite.
Adoption doesn't matter.
No, the opposite, or
adoption's irrelevant.
No. Which is the worst case? A Jewish woman's egg in a non-Jewish woman, or a Jewish or a non-Jewish woman's egg in a Jewish woman.
No, so he's talking about a case where you have a Jewish woman and a surrogate delivers the baby.
The point is, if the question is a Jewish egg, so the point is, if motherhood is defined by childbirth, then the non-Jewish egg in a Jewish woman is Jewish. If it's the other way around, so the truth of the matter is, it's a discussion in our world today.
And so
is it defined by surrogate or defined by... Now, let me just tell you, in Eretz Yisrael, if you're going to get a surrogate and you're Jewish, the Beis Din demands of you to get a Jewish surrogate.
So in the, let's say a case where it's a non-Jewish surrogate, so fine, the baby's born, so then what's involved with making the baby Jewish? He has a bris on the 8th day,
right.
What?
You have to go through conversion.
But what type?
Same conversion. So the truth of the matter is, it will be a suffix. Is the person Jewish or not Jewish? Some people say yes, and therefore what you do is conversion.
So what does the conversion look like when you're born day one?
The conversion of a baby?
Yeah.
Conversion of a baby is done what's called al das Beis Din.
You can convert a baby?
Yes.
Okay, so even if this is the worst case, that the baby is not Jewish, it's not really such a problem.
Well, there are certain demands in terms of Yerusha is a different issue, but there are certain demands of any conversion. I mean, in terms of conversion of a child, the question is what the standards are in that conversion.
Wait, a baby who's converted doesn't have to choose when they're 13?
A baby who's converted, once they're told that they were converted, has the right to say, I don't want it, and revert back to being not Jewish. I've been told of one case like that. There was a guy, who actually was a Lubavitcher, and supposedly, I don't remember, my wife remembers him, and he was a Lubavitcher, a regular Lubavitcher, and somehow he was already, in his late teens, I think, and he found out that he was actually converted as a child, and he made the decision not to be Jewish, and supposedly next time that my wife saw him, he was a functioning Noahide, which means he believed in following Noahide mitzvahs and so on and so forth, but he didn't look like a Lubavitcher anymore. But the fact is that but that's one case like that. But the fact is that what I'm getting at is legal definition. And what I'm trying to deal with is the fact that in halacha you're dealing with legal definitions. And a lot of times when you ask questions, you think, You're asking reality. You're asking, and the point is that reality is what you're trying to define, but it's a legal definition of the reality. Okay, and that legal definition does obviously overlap with what the actual reality is, but it's not necessarily, you know, a total overlap. Okay, and the fact is that's a very significant definition in terms of understanding what the legal definition is, and that becomes something which I think is significant to remember. And a lot of times, what we were talking about before we ran the camera or whatever, the fact is that a lot of times people ask questions and they don't recognize that the discussion has to go into the legal definition in terms of the legal terms. It's not necessarily the reality or something like that, it's into the legal terms. Okay? What is the legal definition of the situation here? And a lot of times you end up with what seems to be conclusions which a lot of people sit there and say, gee, that doesn't seem... But the truth is, it's consistent within the legal system. That's a completely different result. Try to think of another example of this. I know it comes. It comes up all the time in the sense that sometimes you get shocked by what you think the answers are, and a lot of times the answers are actually, like I've been told so many times, of answers, and I'm sitting there saying, yeah, I understand it, because I understand the legal terminology and the legal perspectives that are used in arriving at that kind of decision. Let me. Anyways, can you guys? Does this make sense to you guys? Like it's.
So then, as people who aren't as knowledgeable.
That's why you have to be knowledgeable.
So what you're getting to is saying that, you know, why we do what we do is based on halacha and based on legal premises and ideas, and that's how we get to what we get to, even though we may not actually understand why we do what we do.
Right.
But
like a lot of times with things like Pesach and so forth, and you know, it's like people go about doing certain things without really understanding what really is the legal concepts behind.
It's a problem too,
right?
Because I think more than that, what happens is when you lose the understanding of why you do things, you lose also the meaning of why you do it, because the halacha is based in meaning. You know, I always felt that the rabbis didn't make halacha to make our lives difficult, right? They didn't do it to say what degree of difficulty can we live with. They did it based on logic, based on what made at that time total sense to them. So the purpose, anyway, I feel, is in understanding halacha is really understanding the connection, understanding the Torah behind it.
And it's interesting what you're saying. The halacha, when you say about the understanding meaning and so forth, there's the hashkafic understanding, the philosophical, theological understanding of halacha, what you think this purpose of halacha is, and so forth. But the fact is, it's also the halachic methodology in itself, and the technical aspect of that methodology, which is extremely significant. You end up in certain situations where the lack of, like, there's a concept like this, for example. If a Jew is driving in his car, you can't tell Jew something on Shabbos, to do something on Shabbos that violates the law, right? So you can't say to if a Jew sits there and wants to violate, Shabbos, you can't assist him in violating Shabbos, right? So this leads to a situation. What happens if a Jew comes up to you? You're walking the shul. Some guy is coming up to you and says, driving, and says, looks Jewish, or the community is, he's in an area which is mostly Jewish, and he says, hey, I'm looking for the shul. How do I get to the shul? Right? So the point is that the argument is that you can't tell him directions, right? Because you're assisting him in violating Shabbos by driving to shul,
although
right?
by that token, couldn't you also just get out and walk? Like, if you give him directions...
The fact is he's in the car.
You could
right?
say, like, how we were saying before, when you have non-Jewish workers, you can't tell them use the dishwasher. You can say...
Not with a Jew. You can't do that with a Jew. Cannot do that with a Jew. Okay? Because that's the difference between Jew and non-Jew.
Oh, wow.
The same thing I said with non-Jews, that applies to non-Jews. You can't do that with a Jew. So the fact is, a Jew says, tell me how to, I'm lost. I'm looking how to get to the shul, this shul, and can you tell me how to get there? And you turn right here and then left there. But by telling you turn right here, turn left there, you are involved in his ma'aseh vera, in his action. So that's one argument.
So what if someone comes to your house and says, how do I get to here and there, and there might be a possibility they may drive, maybe...
So that already is a different issue, and maybe is, maybe isn't, so that's a different issue. And the question, how close is it, can you assume he's going to drive, not drive, so forth and so forth. Right. But if you know for sure he's going to drive, right, then you have a problem, you can't tell him.
Shabbos lunch, I heard there's also a thing like having...
Yeah, that's right, but I want to get to something else. Okay? So I heard an argument, and I heard this argument supposedly from Yoshe Bear. He says, you got to give him the instructions. Why do you have to give him directions? Why? Because if you don't give him directions, what's going to happen? No. What's going to happen if you don't give him directions?
It would be Machal Shabbos even more.
Why?
So get lost.
Right. If you don't give him directions, he is going to be driving more around and be more Machal Shabbos. Therefore, by giving him directions, you're actually lessening the Chol Shabbos.
He says, where's the pronoun?
Right? Okay? So the point is that that's an interesting argument, but that already is a legal argument. What's the argument against that, though? The legal argument against that, though, is that by giving him directions, you are actually involved in what he's doing. By not giving directions, you're not involved. So the point is you're now getting into legal determinations.
Wouldn't he do it anyway, though?
What?
Wouldn't he do it anyway?
Do what?
Drive around?
No, if he has directions, he knows I turn right here and go that way.
As opposed to just driving around in a circle.
Trying to find a place. Or he's going to try and find someone else that has directions from.
Okay, I can't talk.
Right?
Yeah.
The fact is that what? So then there's an issue with GPS. It's also cool Shabbos.
Damned if you do, damned
if you don't.
The point is what a lot of this leads to is an issue that I think is a the point is that when you start thinking in legal terms, you start thinking in a very different perception. Now the truth is, in thinking in those legal terms, you also have a very, very different perception of what's going on in terms of philosophy and theology and the understanding of the mitzvot.
But there should be a synthesis between the two. Absolutely.
But the fact is, the synthesis has to be in terms of trying to understand the legal movement and so forth. But the fact is that the synthesis works on a certain plane in that regard. But the point is, if you understand that you're talking in terms of legal definitions, begin to understand that you begin to start looking at your questioning a little bit differently, and you begin to understand the breakdown of all the issues that are involved. And we see this in so many different ways. Like I mentioned to you guys before, in terms of, let's say, any prohibition that you read through the Chumash, do this, you die. You do that, you get killed. This punishment, that punishment. But in order to get punished from a Jewish court, you need to have 2 witnesses, and you need to have hasra, a warning. The point is that try and get that done. So then you see, it's a very different process. And as I told you before, for example, the Rosh says that the reason the person is executed, it's not because the person was Machal Shabbos, right? The reason the person is executed is because the person, if he just wanted to be Machal Shabbos for the reason, for some personal pleasure, right? Or that, then all he had to do was keep quiet when he had a hasra, when he was warned. Just didn't have to accept the hasra. Then he could do it. Well, why is it that he ends up facing a death penalty? Because when he was warned, he said, I don't care what God told me. If you're only interested in just having whatever pleasure it is from the Avera, keep your mouth shut. So it tells you the Avera takes on a different connotation. And that applies so many times in legal reasoning. That the fact is a lot of times people don't understand or don't fully understand the significance of the legal reasoning under the law. They work on very shallow understandings. Basic, and those shallow understandings basically it's like these principles, like just the physical principles.
There's also, these are mishpats adam l'adam, but if he's machal Shabbos, whether it can be proven or not, he still has mishpat shemayim.
Yeah, that's Kodesh Baruch Hu's cheshbon.
We're not God. You keep on saying that.
That's Kodesh Baruch Hu's cheshbon, and that Kodesh Baruch Hu knows what the proper response is to that person's behavior. But the fact is, in so many different ways, now, are there people who sometimes use these legal determinations to try and get around the law? Yes. There are people who sometimes use some of these things to get around the law, play games with the law, and so forth and so forth. They come up with these heterim, based upon this reason or that reason or that reason. And the fact is that that's the problem. But the point is the legal determinations basically are to give you some insight into the halacha, beyond just the simple functioning of reality. There's a legal theory involved here. So when you ask a question, and it really starts with kosher. When you ask the question of kosher, if you think that being kosher basically means, hey, it doesn't have pork in it, it's okay. It's not. The question is, what's the legal determination of kosher? And it's a legal determination. Okay?